Hello and welcome to Antinatalism this week. 9th of April was International Antinatalism Day. We have quite a few videos made for it and also an announcement. Let's start with Lawrence's live stream on the day, which was a fundraiser for MSI Reproductive Choices. Lawrence introduced their work and then went through the Marzipan miniseries, which was started by Mati Hairi on the Exploring Antinatalism podcast and then ended with his discussion with David Banetar. The good news is Lawrence raised a total of £316 in donation to MSI Reproductive Choices. Congratulations to Lawrence on this, and thanks to all the donors who donated for this important cause. There were many more videos on this day. A channel called The Child Free Couple made 3 videos talking about antinatalism in 3 different languages: Marathi, Hindi and English. It is refreshing to see child-free channels making antinatalism content. A channel called Ova Rot made a short but quite explicit antinatalist video in an illustration form. And then Myonsky Theatre made a 30-second cartoon of Russian dolls to show antinatalism. We also have an announcement by Bengali antinatalists on the day. They are starting an initiative to actively assist people in Kolkata, that's the capital city of the state of West Bengal in India, to get sterilization procedures for both men and women and also help with abortion services as well as care for incomplete abortion. If you need help, you can contact the number on your screen through WhatsApp. An interesting online event by the Philosophy Club will be happening in June later this year. It is a discussion about 2 nicely made documentaries with opposing views on the aspects of having children. First one is Birth Gap by Stephen J. Shaw, who has made a case based on data that people are not having enough children with an unquestioned assumption that it is a bad thing. It is a 2-part documentary and only first part is available for free on YouTube, which will be part of discussion in this event. The second documentary is I Wish I Were Never Born by Jack Boswell. This features antinatalists from the UK and US like Lawrence Anton, Danny Shine, Amanda Sukanik, Matt from Life Sucks, and Les Unite of Voluntary Human Extinction Movement. Now, this documentary was more about antinatalists than about antinatalism, so I'm not sure if it is the exact opposite of Stephen J. Shaw's Birth Gap, but still I think these two provide enough fodder for a good discussion. The event will be on June 15th, 1 p.m. to 3 p.m. Pacific time, and if you're like me where this time zone is not suitable, then the good news is that they usually put the recording on their YouTube channel afterwards, so we can still check it out once that happens. 16th Congress of the European Society for Gynecology was held from 19th to 22nd of March. In that, there were 2 presentations indirectly related to antinatalism. Both were by Jan Gregus, who is a doctor of medicine and researcher at Masaryk University in Czech Republic. One presentation was on population versus overpopulation, Marx against Malthus. Jan collected latest data from organizations like UN, World Wide Fund, etc. in the context of impacts of population and overpopulation and presented it in relation to what Malthus and Marx had said. These were opposite views, by the way. The Malthusian views on population were demographic, that is, it is necessary to reduce population to improve the economy. The Marxist views were rather economic. It is necessary to improve the economy to reduce population. In other words, if there is economic growth, people will decide to have fewer children. The second presentation was Antinatalism and Intended Infertility. It gave a background of antinatalism and its philosophical roots and then made a case that women are stigmatized for not having children even by their healthcare providers. Stating that having a child is a human right, not a duty, the presentation concluded saying whatever their reasons, people who want to stay child-free deserve respect to their choices and autonomy. As such, we should emphasize our support to them instead of stigmatizing and or coercing them into unwanted parenthood. Now, I could not find the actual presentations as they don't seem to be published anywhere, but if you happen to find them, please let me know. Tracking Types of Non-Parents in the United States is a paper which, as the title suggests, analyzes non-parents in the US. Usually we classify non-parents as either child-free or childless, but the paper goes deeper. It looks at attitudes, behavior, and the circumstances in which people make the decision to have or not have children. And then it presents 6 different categories. This diagram shows the way this classification is done. On the horizontal axis are the 3 attitudes that people have to the question of whether they want children: no, yes, and don't know. On the vertical axis are barriers by circumstances that people are in: biological, social, or they don't know of any barriers, or they don't have any barriers in reality. Those who don't want to have children, irrespective of any circumstantial barriers, are easy to classify. They are just child-free folk. Those who say yes to have children could still be non-parents because they might have biological barriers or their social situation is not suitable. For example, they can't find a partner, or they are not in a good financial state to raise children, and so on. Or they don't have any barriers that they know of, but they are just not parents yet. The third answer, don't know, by non-parents could be because they are ambivalent because of the biological or social barriers, or they have not decided on the question yet. So in all, we have 6 categories: child-free, biologically childless, socially childless, not yet parents, ambivalent, and undecided. The paper then maps the data from US National Survey of Family Growth onto these categories. This graph shows percentage of non-parents on the y-axis for the period between 2002 to 2023. As you can see, the percentage of not yet parents has dropped notably, while the percentage of child-free people has increased in the same period. That means more and more people are deciding not to have kids, irrespective of whether they have biological or social barriers. Not surprising, but a good news. What's the bad news? The paper does not include antinatalists. Maybe because it's a fringe category, or maybe because antinatalists are not exclusively non-parents, or maybe because that would open a Pandora's box of further classification, or maybe because NSFG does not collect the data for this. I don't know the reason, but still an interesting paper. There's a podcast called Matters of Life and Death, and the most recent episode on it was Antinatalism, Should We Stop Having Kids? It's a Christian podcast, and interestingly, it was a conversation between a father and his biological son. Tim Watt discusses this topic with his father John Watt. On top of it, we also come to know later in the episode that Tim Watt has adopted children. So the whole combination is quite interesting. Moreover, it is not a usual Christian podcast accusing antinatalists to be blasphemous or ridiculing them for not obeying God's orders. It's a refreshing perspective from Christian point of view, looking at antinatalism both in social and philosophical worlds. They discuss why young people are not having children, the environmental side of it, the child-free part of it, and also philosophical and theological parts, including antinatalism in Christianity, both in literal and spiritual terms. So it was really nice to listen to, but there was some misrepresentation of Benatar's arguments.
There's a philosopher called David Benatar who wrote a book, an entire book called Better Never to Have Been, The Harm of Coming into Existence. And the whole argument is based, as you say, on the net amount of pleasure versus suffering that there is in an average life. And if the net amount of suffering on balance is greater than the net amount of pleasure, then frankly, it's better not to exist at all.
That is not the whole of his argument. Yes, there is evaluation of plain versus pleasure and suffering in what Benatar has said, but that is not the whole. The mistake John makes is one of the mistakes Lawrence points in a recent video, and which we are going to look back later in this video. But for now, let me just quote Benatar from Better Never to Have Been when he says, "One of the implications of my argument is that a life filled with good and containing only the most minute quantity of bad, a life of utter bliss adulterated only by the pain of a single pinprick, is worse than no life at all." Now on to some notable videos. Other than International Antinatalism Day, there was a video about antinatalism which was only 28 seconds long, but the notable point was that this was in a language called Gujarati, which is spoken by 62 million people and is the first language of current Prime Minister of India and was of Mahatma Gandhi. This is the first time I have seen anything about antinatalism in Gujarati. From Gujarati to Turkish, there was a short 54-second video about antinatalism in Turkish on a channel called Diamond Tema. It's a short video but on a channel that has 1.2 million subscribers. Rethinking made a video about real motivations for having children. Often those who do not want to have children are accused of being selfish. This video makes it clear that the real motivations to have children are in fact based in selfishness.
Often it is driven by personal desires. I want to have children. I want to experience raising a child. I want to provide grandchildren for my parents. Or I want to fulfill religious or cultural expectations. Notice the recurring I in these statements. This emphasis on personal wants reveals that the decision to have children is at its core self-centered. Is it not selfish to bring a child into the world without fully considering the inevitable pain and suffering they may experience?
The Last Messiah is a famous essay by Peter Wiesel Zapfer, who was a Norwegian philosopher and an antinatalist. The essay was written in 1933, so that's not the news. The news is that reading of its Hindi translation was uploaded on a channel, Syllabus with Rohit, which has 109,000 subscribers. Lawrence made a video about the mistakes people make when they say, "I am glad to have been born and therefore it is better to have come into existence." He refers to a paper by David Benatar, To Be or Not to Have Been, which was written in 2001, so 5 years prior to Better Never to Have Been. Lawrence presents conceptual and psychological mistakes people make while equating these two claims. In conceptual mistakes, one is that it is assumed that coming into existence is a benefit. Secondly, instead of comparing coming into existence with never coming into existence, people compare the benefits of coming into existence with the harms of coming into existence. And thirdly, people think that goods in life outweigh the bads. In psychological biases, there are status quo bias, confirmation bias, cultural bias, evolutionary bias in favor of reproduction, and motivated reasoning. Now, out of these, I hope you can spot what mistake John Watt was making in the podcast that we saw earlier. Just in addition, Benatar also makes a similar distinction between gladness of being born and betterment of coming into existence on page 58 and 59 of Better Never to Have Been. In very simple words, the feeling that I'm glad to be born is an emotion. It can change from time to time and circumstances. In a period of extreme agony, you might not feel so glad to be born, and at other times, you may feel glad to be born. But whether it is better to come into existence is a fact. In fact, a binary fact constant across the lifespan of the being. So if we equate that with feeling of gladness about being born, then we get fuzzy results of true and false at the same time. That's why Benatar says we can imagine somebody being glad at one stage in his life that he came to be, and then or earlier, perhaps in the midst of extreme agony, regretting his having coming into existence. Now it cannot be the case that it is both better to have come into existence and better never to have come into existence. To Lawrence's video was a response by a channel called Naturalist Ted, whom I'm just going to call Ted. He made his response with the title Being Born May Be Better Than Not Existing. In that, he used a lot of thought experiments to prove that your coming into existence was actually a better alternative. Here's an honest disclaimer. I could not fully understand what his point was, but this is my guess, which could be completely wrong, so take it with a grain of salt. If I had not come into existence, someone else would have taken my place, and therefore, me not coming into existence does not make that much of a difference. Moreover, if that other being who came in my stead suffered a lot, comparatively speaking, then we could make a case for me coming into existence being better. To make matter worse, it could have been more than one being. Simple example, imagine that there was a different sperm fertilizing that egg, and that sperm could have had severe genetic defect. Even worse, after fertilizing the egg, the zygote splits into two, producing twins with that severe defect. And to top it, it produces conjoined twins. We can also imagine this happening at any point in my ancestral binary tree. We can let our imagination to any extent to produce worse results to any degree in order to prove why our existence has been better, because it avoided those potential worse existences. Now, there is a wrong way to argue against this. I could say that this is from a universe's point of view, meaning we can compare a universe in which I have existed to the one where I would not have existed and make a calculation of which one is better. To this, I could argue that the arguments for antinatalism are not from universe's point of view. They are person affecting, that is, whether coming into existence is better for the being who comes into existence. Now, I said that's a wrong way to argue, because Ted would say that from the point of view of those potential worse lives, it is better that you came into existence in their stead. That, I think, opens a crack. Ted agrees, at least implicitly, that it is better for those worse lives to not have come into existence for their own sake. The question then is, was my coming into existence the only way to prevent their existence? Benatar has argued in his book that it would have been better if there were no sentient beings, not some instead of others. So I can say that I'm glad that I came into existence instead of those potential worse lives, and that I'm glad for them. But we could still say that it would have been better that none of us had come into existence. That is the actual argument for antinatalism. A new sort of pro-natalist book, After the Spike, Population Progress and the Case for People by Dean Spears and Michael Geruso will be published in July. As the title and cover page shows, the book makes the case for people after the spike of population is over. The book seems to say that we should stabilize population and that depopulation is more damaging. And that's why I guess this is a pro-natalist book. CNN posted a video report of Natal Conference with a sarcastic title, "Why Are High Fertility People Always So Weird? A Weekend with the Pro-Natalists." This has actual footage from the conference. The journalist Mina Duerson, who actually attended the conference, is seen interviewing many people from the audience as well as from speakers panel. It included Kevin Dolan, the main organizer of the conference, Dr. Catherine Pakluk, and many others, including the weirdly dressed Collinses. If you are an antinatalist like me, I suggest you keep an ice pack and a pillow at hand before you watch this. But I think you should still watch this anyway, because we should be aware of what pro-natalists are doing and if they are having any real arguments that we might be missing. An article on the critic.co.uk made a case that having children is not bad for environment and it won't hurt the planet. Well, okay, if that's what you believe, it won't hurt the planet. But what about the child itself? Having children certainly hurts children. The children that you have. That's the point we have to keep on making again and again. Anyway, thanks for watching and see you next time.